Greetings and bienvenue, MITZU. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I started telling this story in another thread, but quickly realized it was going to be long. So here it is. I had heard stories from my girlfriend who, as a relentless skeptic, is chilled to the bone by the unexplainable things that happened when her sister was around. Her skepticism of her own stories was what fueled my desire to really see these impossible things firsthand. And while I regret very little in my life, a large part of me wishes I never went to that house. Although it has nothing to do with pets as the OP had requested, I'll try and write down to the best of my ability what happened that night. I know there is a lot of fiction and roleplay on /x/, but I swear on my life that everything I'm about to tell you is true. It started out as a housewarming party at my girlfriend's new home. Her sister had come over as well as many other friends. Over the course of the night, however, I noticed that little by little the party members were disappearing. I became suspicious as to their whereabouts and began searching for them. I opened a door to a bedroom belonging to one of my girlfriend's roommates, only to find about 12 people huddled around a small game board that was glowing in the dark. Everyone was silent, and you could feel an energy of anticipation in the room. On closer examination of the board, I found it to be a Ouija board. Even though I had never seen one, it was easily identifiable. The people holding the planchette were addressing questions to some unseen force in the room as it slid across the board, answering yes and no. I was more than a bit skeptical, as I could easily tell that the individual who had supplied the board was moving the planchette by his own will. I eventually made my way to the planchette and called him out on it, which the other people around the board were quick to agree with. I began asking questions, but there was suddenly no response to the board. We decided to try it in the bathroom to see if we could make it work, but alas, it remained motionless. Then I had an idea. I had heard my girlfriend's stories of the supernatural things that happened around her sister, and the sightings by multiple people in her house of a tall, threatening shadow of a man out of the corner of their eyes. So I decided to put my skepticism to the test. I wanted proof that there existed something beyond our logical understanding. I decided to bring it up with her boyfriend first. I began to explain my idea to him and my purpose for doing it, and he was as intrigued as I. He too wanted proof that there existed something beyond the natural, logical world, and agreed that it would be only me and him, and that neither of us would move the planchette by our own will. I believed him completely and would believe him again, although I would imagine it hard to find the same trust for him as a reader through just my words. From this point on, I will refer to my girlfriend's sister as L for simplicity. We made our way back into the original room. Him and I took control of the board so as to have minimal interference from would-be trolls. I was the one who began asking the questions. Is the thing that follows L around in the room with us? It should be noted that we had not spoken with L at all about this, and she was deeply against any contact with this thing, which she believed to be a demon. As she voiced her concerns, the planchette dragged slowly across the board and fell upon the word, yes. My heart began to race, and the room became silent. I didn't know the rules behind using this board, and still am not sure of my preconceptions, but I was told we should ask 5 yes and no questions before proceeding to ask it more complicated questions. Unfortunately, I cannot remember the content of these questions, but this only tells me that their answers were irrelevant to the story at hand. Sorry if this story is becoming long. I've told it a few times before, but never in such detail. I want to write this down as thoroughly as possible. The first thought on my mind was to ask it the obvious question. I had been told of a story in which Elle's closet door slammed and her light bulb burst out of nowhere, so first asked it about this. Were you the one who broke Elle's light bulb? The planchette fell upon yes. Do you enjoy frightening Elle? The planchette once again dragged to yes. How old are you? The planchette moved to the number 9. This confused a lot of people, and Elle was visibly disturbed by this answer. We knew that it was not 9 years old, so what was it saying? Was it trying to deceive us? Someone suggested this meant it had been following Elle since she was 9. If this was true, It matched up with the age my girlfriend began to notice strange things happening in their home. When asked if this was true, the planchette dragged itself to yes. At this point, Elle was deeply disturbed and decided she had had enough. She got up and left the room, and no sooner did the planchette violently throw itself to the corner and drag across goodbye. It would not even stay in the room unless she was there. At this point in the story, I should mention that my girlfriend's family was currently in the process of moving from the home in which the light bulb had exploded. Every piece of furniture had been removed, save for some chair that had been left for whoever was working on the house. I had more than enough evidence to prove to myself that this was no figment of delusion, but I foolishly wanted more. I needed to see with my own eyes that which had been repeated around campfires. So I presented an idea to the immediate group that was still with us, that we go to where this entity had been most prominent. I suggested we take the Ouija board and go to Elle's old house. The majority was excited by this idea, perhaps foolishly believing that I was experienced in this sort of business. It took quite a bit of convincing, but Elle finally agreed to come, so long as she could put in her headphones and listen to her music, avoiding any and all involvement in this session. And so we drove to the house. The house was completely vacant of all furniture, save for that chair, but the electricity was luckily still functioning. We set up in the kitchen, which had both a walk-in pantry and a countertop island which we set the board upon. Elle, wanting nothing to do with this, sat on the chair in the pantry with her friend. They kept the lights on in that small room and closed the door. We turned the lights off in the kitchen, not because we had to or anything, but because we were enjoying this rush of adrenaline that our new location had provided us. I began by asking it the same questions as I had at the other house, to ensure that it was the same entity to which we spoke. I then walked across the room and placed my keys on the microwave. "Would you move those keys off the microwave?" The planchette moved to no. I was a bit frustrated, but hadn't given up hope. "If I were the only one in here, would you move those keys?" The planchette again moved to no. It apparently could not move them or did not like the idea of it doing something because I told it to. So I tried a different approach. "If one of us were to be left alone in this room, would you appear to them?" The planchette dragged over to no again. I would have thought that I was annoying it, but I had this strange sensation that it was speaking to me very formally, which to this day is something I desperately avoid thinking about. I then realized what I was doing wrong. "If Elle was in here alone, would you move those keys?" The planchette hesitated, but then it dragged itself to yes. "If Elle was in a room alone, would you show yourself to her?" It again moved to yes, this time with much less hesitation. I then had an idea which, if successful, would prove to me beyond a doubt that what I was dealing with was not some subconscious will of my own moving the piece, but rather something beyond our understanding. I whispered it so it would not be heard. "Would you shut the lights off in the pantry?" The planchette hesitated and then began dragging toward yes. However, it did not stop at yes, but continued to drag until it had gone straight off the board, which to my horror and excitement was in the direction of the pantry in which Elle resided. Everyone was dead quiet. What happened next happened in a heartbeat, and I lacked the literary ability to accurately describe the resulting chaos, so my fractured account will have to do. Several things happened at that moment. There was an incredibly loud bang like a gunshot. Both people inside the pantry screamed. The door handle frantically jiggled and the lights went off in the pantry as both girls fell out into the kitchen. Now, mind you, this happened in less than 2 seconds, so the panic was incredible. I sat staring at the open pantry, completely baffled. I couldn't believe it. This was what I had come for, and I had found it. Actual proof. Not scientific by any means, but proof enough to me that there exist things that we cannot see, smell, or hear, things that lack any sort of scientific description but exist nonetheless. Things out there that go bump in the night, that children grow to fear, that parents must lie about and say that it's all in their heads. I should have been terrified by all means, but I was thrilled. A small grin crept across my face, but I had to stifle it as the 2 girls I had sacrificed to acquire this realization were nearly in tears. After the lights went on and everyone settled down, they explained what happened. On the top shelf of the pantry was a wooden board which functioned as a shelf in the cupboard, but had been removed for whatever reason. It was standing up on its side, leaning against the wall. Elle's friend had been staring at it when it suddenly flipped away from the wall, slamming the shelf and flipping off to the floor. Both girls quickly tried to escape the pantry, and in the resulting chaos, one may have bumped against the wall and turned off the light. I was unsure if the lights went out by paranormal means, but the timing of the incident, along with the mysterious way in which the board was ejected from its resting place, was enough for me. The lights going out was just a bonus. I should have left it at that. I had what I wanted, and I didn't need any more evidence. What I did next I will always consider an act of foolishness. Although had I done differently, I would have regretted it for just the opposite reason of not going far enough. But what was done was done. Our group was largely through with dealing with the supernatural and wanted to go home. But I insisted that one more session take place. But this time with only 3 people in the room that Elle once occupied. The room that the dogs would never go into. The room whose hallway was actively avoided by the entire family. And of course, the room in which the light bulb had erupted one unfortunate evening. It might also be mentioned that the light fixture on that ceiling never worked again, to the confusion of many electricians who attempted to fix it. We all made our way upstairs to the door. The other group members refused to go in, and I could not blame them, as I could feel it too. The hallway had a subtle but dreadful feeling. It's the kind of feeling you get as you walk through a dark house alone, knowing nothing is there but checking over your shoulder regardless. Me and 2 others entered the room, and I will never forget how horrible it felt. Even the people outside could feel it. Only a poet or a madman could describe it in a sufficient manner. All I can say is that upon opening the door, the stifling feeling of dread, stagnation, and solitude caused one member of the group to run outside and throw up. We sat down in this room and began asking questions. The door was shut behind us for maximum effect. Immediately, we could tell how the difference of location had affected our board. Instead of dragging as we had become accustomed to, it began launching itself violently between letters and hurling out from under our fingers on more than one occasion. We were on its home turf. Strangely enough, it is hard to recall exactly what was said in that room. The most dominant memory to me was the overwhelming feeling of dread, and a feeling that someone was watching us from the corner of the room, which I later found out was a feeling shared among the 3 of us participating. I do, however, remember the question that finally drove us out of the room. I wasn't fazed by the answer so much as my colleagues, but I refused to stay in there alone with that thing. "What is your name?" It spelled out God. That was the end for the other 2 people, who had had enough for one night and left me quickly. I said goodbye so as not to upset it, packed up the thing, and left. As we left the house, a feeling of unbelievable relief washed over me. Not, I suspect, unlike a prisoner on death row who has been informed that he has been pardoned. It wasn't until I returned home that I broke down in tears. I had what I wanted, but at what cost? What man can ever sleep peacefully at night knowing such a thing exists? I deeply regretted going to that house. I deeply regretted going into that room. But there was one thing I regretted most of all. When I said I packed up and left the room following the declaration of its name, I didn't pack up and leave just then. I asked it one more question, the answer to which will haunt me until the day I die. "If Elle leaves, will you stay with me?" It said yes. I hesitate even mentioning it, as I don't know if its significance is all in my head. But it scares me enough that I refuse to look at it except for when it is absolutely necessary, even if there is nothing in the picture, as many have told me before. On the trip back home, I had my friend take a picture of me in the car as I started to feel sick to my stomach to the point of throwing up very suddenly. The picture on the left is the one that she took. Only the thumbnail data was saved in the archive. Upon examining it, she refused to let me see it until days later. There is something very strange reflected in the car window, a reflection of something that just wasn't in the car. I hesitate posting it, as it may easily be nothing more than a figment of my imagination, but here it is nonetheless. In the days following, I slept next to a small bottle of holy water and kept salt with me. I didn't know if it would physically do me any good, but it helped me sleep. My girlfriend's younger sister, not Elle, actually mentioned something about the house recently, something that really, really scares me. They opened the garage door and found the chair sitting right in the middle of the garage, facing directly towards the door. We definitely didn't leave it there. What's more is every time they went to the house, the chair was in a different place. Once they drove by the house and saw it through the window, facing outward. The last place they found it before they left the house for the final time was right in the center of my girlfriend's room, facing the wall.
Sounds like something out of Poltergeist, but at least the thing doesn't sound all that dangerous.
Not physically, but sometimes I worry about Elle, because this thing is obviously malicious. And while it may not be physically dangerous, the mental dangers it poses are very real. There are things that I have sworn not to tell, such as the content of violent dreams in which this tall man of shadows comes to her and makes her commit acts of horrendous violence, dreams which she has woken from only to find the man standing at the end of her bed staring down at her.
Yeah, I can certainly understand the mental dangers of that. I don't know if we're dealing with the same thing here, but I was once confronted by a demon, threatened my life and gave off a similar pressure to what you were describing in that house. From what I can tell, as malicious as demons are, they don't seem to attack people too often. Never quite understood that. Though for me the demon was a one-time thing and it never bothered me again. Though trying to actually fight it was probably a bad idea on my part considering I couldn't see the thing. I'm really glad it didn't fight back. Pretty sure it was just screwing with me.
There was one story that I just remembered that my girlfriend told me about. I won't go into as much detail as I did above, as I didn't experience it firsthand. Also, my hands hurt from typing LOL. Years ago. My girlfriend is still living in the spooky house, babysitting a neighbor's child. The child was 5-ish years old. The child was very literate for its age, could talk fluently, and did not play with imaginary friends. Wouldn't you know it? The child starts playing with an imaginary friend, playing peekaboo over the couch and into the kitchen that we would later set up our Ouija board, laughing every time she was caught. My girlfriend doesn't care. The child is entertaining itself. Suddenly, the child starts screaming and crying, completely inconsolable. My girlfriend eventually gets her to stop and tell her what happened. I was playing with Heather, but the dark man said he was going to hurt me. My girlfriend practically jumped out of her pants for more reasons than one, which will become evident shortly. I recently went with my girlfriend to visit that family. The young girl is much older now and is midway through elementary school. We asked her if she remembered anything about it, and to our surprise, she remembered in detail everything that happened, confirming my girlfriend's story. She said she was playing with a girl, whose name she couldn't remember. My girlfriend suggested Heather, and the young girl immediately noted that as the correct name. Then my girlfriend told me something she had never told me before. She said when they moved in, they were supposedly the first people in the house, but in the center of one of the rooms was a diary with the name Heather written across it. Feeling like this was the beginning of a horror movie, they immediately threw it away, freaked out by it. I guess I might as well tell the story of the light bulb since I have mentioned it so many times throughout this thread. Elle was laying in bed one evening when she saw her closet door open. She assumed it was the cat, as they had several. However, shortly after opening, it closed again. She told me in jest that she remembered thinking, "Cats don't close doors." The door opened once more when she began to feel something beneath her mattress, pushing it up from beneath as though something larger than the space beneath it was attempting to crawl in from the foot of the bed. She freaked out and ran for the door, but when she tried the handle, it was locked. It should be noted, however, that the lock was on the inside of the room, so it may be more correct to say that it was stuck. She then did the next best thing and attempted to turn the lights on. I probably don't need to tell you what happened next. The glass was found completely shattered and in every corner of the room. She never slept in that room again. As far as I understand, it just enjoys making her miserable. It could be the case that it feeds off of negative energy, as she is quite the pessimist, but I won't pretend to understand it in the least. All I know for sure is that it exists.
Whatever he is, he seems bound to Elle and yourself. He doesn't seem really hostile, but he will probably stay with you even if you try to ignore him. So another Ouija session sounds like a good idea if you feel able to do it. By discovering more about his nature and his motivations, you can find ways to keep him away. However, don't try to directly confront it unless it is the last option you have. He may become very aggressive and dangerous. If you discover what links him to L, destroying this link may cause the entity to leave. If he wants something that you are able to offer, you can try to conclude an agreement so he will stay away or stop annoying you or even help you. If it only feeds off negative energy, maybe he will be less powerful or leave if L becomes more positive. When was the last time he manifested himself? Does he manifest himself during peculiar events or periods?
I don't think he is actually bound to myself, but I know he has the potential to be, which is somewhat frightening. I don't think I will attempt to contact it again in any way for various reasons. As far as L becoming more positive, it's just her personality. I would never suggest she change who she is to such an extent, because that suggestion would not only come off as insulting to her, but also wouldn't change much even if she did humor me. Major events like the light bulb in this story aren't normal occurrences. Usually it's just a vague feeling and doors and objects moving. Interestingly, when she moved in with her current roommates, a month or so went by before one of them asked her if she thought their house was haunted.
I do not suggest you break any links between L and the figure. There are not one but two figures, the girl Heather and the tall dark man. I assume that the dark man is being kept at bay by Heather, which might be protecting L. Heather seems to be a good force because it was playing with the 5-year-old. Please do note that these are just my assumptions, but you should keep that in mind.
I understand where your assumptions are coming from, but I don't agree with them, and I should explain why. First off, earlier in the comments, my girlfriend actually did appear and wondered if anyone had any more questions regarding this story, but didn't receive any meaningful questions. She initially posted this because, after reading my stories, had several corrections, one of which was that the name Heather was actually Sarah, not that it really matters. She also informed me that it wasn't a diary that they found, but a notebook in which the name Sarah had been written over and over for pages and pages, as though someone was practicing their signature. Interestingly, for quite a long time, Sarah was the only entity occupying the house. They actually contacted it with a Ouija board, where it was really friendly. She told me that they were actually completely okay being haunted by a little girl, as it wasn't really threatening. Although from time to time my girlfriend would notice her younger sister run into a room, only to find that she was never there in the first place, it was never something that caused any trauma or damage. However, this thing slowly crept into their lives, eventually overtaking any other spirits that may have been residing in that house. According to the child that was babysat at that house, the tall, dark man was threatening Sarah as well as herself, making me believe that it was the other way around than you suggested. Although this doesn't really pertain to your comment, I want to announce to anyone that has the patience to read through the massive amount of information and get to the very bottom of this thread that my girlfriend has informed me that L is, to my surprise, completely up for another Ouija session. It may not be for a while, as my university starts up next week, and my next break seems quite distant from here. But I promise everyone that this is not the end to this story.
But you mentioned in the story that a kid was being baby-seated and that it was playing with Sarah and that it started crying, saying that the tall shadow figure would hurt the child. That's why I assume that there are two.
No, I agree. I was only disagreeing that Sarah was protecting L. I believe that Sarah was completely overwhelmed by this dark force that crept into the house. It's almost a shame the amount of insane things that have happened regarding L. I almost feel that the more I share about it, the more fictional this story feels. I will try to provide more photographic evidence of the next session in an attempt to provide at least a portion of the assurance and insecurity regarding this creature that I feel.
To me, this story seems completely legit. As long as you don't disappoint at the end with a "open the door, got on the floor, everybody do the dinosaur" kind of shit. Please, be careful in your venture into the house.
I won't be going back to that house as they sold it years ago, but from what I understand, it has followed her from house to house. It's been so noticeable that every time she moves out, the strange things stop overnight. And every time she moves in, within weeks her roommates ask her if she thinks their house is haunted. But regarding my fear of losing the legitimacy that this story holds, I was referring more to the things I haven't said than the things I have. As far as letting the story fall through, if this was anyone else's thread, I wouldn't hesitate ending it with I Lu Mao for a single second, because I'm just that kind of bastard. But I believe that I have a duty to everyone and anyone who has suspended their skepticism for even a moment, as a result of reading the things I've written here to submit as much proof as possible of this thing. All of these succubus, tulpa, and tarot card boards have made /x/ forget about what it once stood for, which was once the discussion and submission of evidence regarding the paranormal.
Interesting. I'm not very familiar with the whole demons and ghosts and whatnot, but it doesn't seem to be always attached around Elle and has to find her if she travels a certain distance, or it gains power from staying in one area and loses it when it leaves. Has Elle ever moved overseas?
As far as I have seen, it seems to follow her relentlessly. When she would leave the room, the Ouija board would immediately go to goodbye. This makes me think it followed her closer than I would have imagined, existing constantly behind her. Of course, this didn't seem to be the case when she was at home, as it may have set up camp in her room. My girlfriend told me it got so bad that Elle would ask her to get things out of her room, so Elle wouldn't have to go near it. There were several years that she just slept out in the loft and didn't even really have a room. If this thing feeds off of negative energy, then that room would have been a buffet of collective fear. However, I don't entirely understand what it is, so it could be possible that it chose that room due to an electrical problem in the wiring above the ceiling with Elle caught in the crossfire. I've heard that electromagnetic radiation from bad wiring and household objects can cause hallucinations of the supernatural. But I've always wondered if ghosts are just more likely to exist around such airborne depositions of electricity. The assumptions I make come with the full realization that they exist as such. I understand that I don't entirely know what I'm doing, and will proceed with the caution I deem necessary to that. Is this a good idea? Absolutely not. I don't think that what I did, nor what I plan on doing, is safe or sane. But I'll be damned if I go to the grave with the regret of missing an opportunity like this. Also, not that it matters, but I wouldn't say I was wrong, as I was only skeptical of the functionality of a Ouija board and the existence of this entity, not an outright denial, and I'm totally okay with that.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.